September 634 AD. The siege of Damascus had dragged into its brutal third month. The colossal Byzantine fortress city had survived the anvil and the hammer. Emperor Heraclius's relief army had been annihilated at Marj al-Safar, and Commander Thomas's massive, multi-gate counterattack had been violently pushed back behind the city walls. Before we dive into the freezing mud and uncover Khalid ibn Walid's daring midnight raid, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon. And if you want to watch these episodes early and support the epic battles we bring to life here at Historic War Lens, join our ranks on Patreon using the link in the description. Now let's march back to the front lines. But as the adrenaline of the summer battles faded, a new, terrifying enemy crept into the Rashidun camps: the bitter Syrian winter. The lush green orchards of the Ghouta oasis withered. Freezing winds howled across the plains, biting through the light desert cloaks of the Arab soldiers. The Muslim army was built for speed, mobility, and open field dominance, not for sitting static in freezing mud outside an impenetrable stone wall. Inside the city, Roman Commander Thomas knew this. He had lost his relief force, and he had lost thousands of men in his failed sortie, but he still held the ultimate high ground. Damascus was heavily stocked with grain, oil, and weapons. Thomas's strategy shifted from aggressive counterattacks to a cold, calculating war of attrition. He would simply sit behind his massive limestone walls, stay warm, and watch the desert warriors freeze and starve outside. Khalid ibn al-Walid understood the grim reality of the changing weather. His army's morale was an iron shield, but even iron shatters if left in the freezing cold long enough. Simply waiting was no longer a viable military strategy. The siege had to end. The Sword of Allah began personally scouting the imposing perimeter, searching desperately for a weakness. And in the dead of night, that weakness finally presented itself. It didn't come in the form of a crumbling wall or a broken gate. It came in the form of a single, desperate man. His name was Yuhanna, known in Western histories as Jonah the Greek. Jonah was not a soldier. He was a wealthy, influential citizen of Damascus. For months, the suffocating lockdown of the siege had delayed his wedding to his betrothed. But as the blockade dragged on, Jonah's frustration morphed into a dark, terrifying realization. He looked at the dwindling morale inside the city, the failure of the emperor's relief army, and the unbreakable ring of Muslim campfires outside the walls. Jonah made a cold, calculated bet against the Roman Empire. He believed the city was going to fall sooner or later, and when it did, he wanted to ensure his own survival. Under the cover of pitch-black darkness, Jonah slipped over the massive walls of Damascus, evaded the Roman sentries, and surrendered himself directly to the Muslim blockade. He demanded to be taken to the supreme commander. When brought before Khalid ibn al-Walid, Jonah offered the ultimate prize: the exact time and place to shatter the impregnable defenses of Damascus. Jonah revealed that the following night, the entire city would be celebrating a major religious festival. The governor of Damascus had recently celebrated the birth of a son, and the city's elite, along with the exhausted garrison, were taking a night off to feast and drink. More importantly, Jonah provided Khalid with a specific tactical vulnerability. Because of the festival, the eastern gate, Bab Sharqi, would be incredibly lightly guarded. The Roman sentries, believing the freezing weather and the deep moat made an Arab attack impossible, would be drunk or asleep. Khalid listened intently. This was not a general assault. Sending thousands of men toward the eastern gate would alert the sentries, sound the alarm, and turn the moat into a watery grave for his army. To exploit this tiny, fleeting window of opportunity, Khalid had to execute something the Roman Empire had never seen from the Arab armies. He couldn't use a hammer. He had to use a scalpel. He planned a highly classified, deep infiltration commando raid, and he was going to lead it himself. Khalid selected exactly 100 of his most elite, battle-hardened veterans. He specifically chose men known for their extreme physical strength and absolute silent discipline. Among them were legendary champions like Khalid ibn Walid, a man Khalid famously claimed was worth 1,000 regular soldiers, and the fearless Mazur ibn Adi. The plan was incredibly dangerous. If they were spotted while crossing the moat or scaling the wall, they would be isolated, trapped against the stone, and slaughtered by Roman archers before the main army could even reach them. Deep in the night, the freezing wind howled, providing the perfect auditory cover. Khalid and his 100 phantoms left the warmth of their campfires. They left their horses behind. They wore dark clothing and silenced their armor to prevent any clinking of metal. They approached the eastern wall of Damascus in total, absolute silence. Standing before them was the deep, freezing water of the defensive moat, and beyond it, the smooth, towering limestone wall of Bab Sharqi. Khalid, Kaka, and Mazur waded into the freezing, cold water. To cross silently without splashing, the ancient sources report they used inflated goat skins as buoyancy aids. The water was agonizingly cold, numbing their limbs as they slowly, silently paddled across the dark moat until their hands touched the freezing stone foundation of the city wall. Looking up, the top of the parapet was cloaked in darkness. There were no torches burning directly above them. Jonah's intelligence was accurate. Khalid ibn Walid, possessing immense upper body strength, took the lead. Using a heavy iron grappling hook attached to a thick rope, he swung it silently in the dark. He threw it upward. The iron hook bit into the stone edge of the parapet high above. The three men froze, holding their breath, waiting for a Roman sentry to shout the alarm. Nothing but the howling wind. The festival was roaring deep inside the city. Testing his weight on the rope, Khalid began the grueling vertical climb up the sheer stone face. Hand over hand, his muscles burning in the freezing air, the legendary warrior hauled himself upward into the darkness. Khalid and Mazur followed right behind him, ascending the rope like shadows. When Khalid silently pulled himself over the ledge and dropped onto the stone walkway of the wall, he found exactly what the defector had promised. The Roman sentries assigned to watch the eastern sector were incapacitated, deep asleep, reeking of heavy wine. Without a sound, the three Muslim commanders drew their daggers. Moving with lethal, surgical precision, they eliminated the sleeping guards. The eastern wall was officially secured. Khalid immediately dropped thick, heavy rope ladders down the inside of the city wall, signaling to the 100 elite veterans waiting in the dark below. Like a stream of black ninjas, the heavily armed Muslim shock troops rapidly scaled the wall and flooded onto the parapets. Damascus was breached, but they were still only 100 men inside a fortress of tens of thousands. The mission was only half complete. Leaving a small detachment to hold the wall, Khalid led his strike team down the heavy stone staircases, descending silently into the dark streets of the city. Their objective was the massive, iron-studded wooden doors of the east gate itself. Approaching the gatehouse from the inside, they encountered the inner guard detail. This time, there was no stealth. Khalid drew his Arabian sword. Khalid and the veterans surged forward with terrifying kinetic fury. The brief, brutal close-quarters melee in the gatehouse was a slaughter. The surprised, unarmored Roman guards were annihilated before they could even sound the city's alarm horns. Khalid stepped over the bodies and approached the colossal locking mechanism of Bab Sharqi. His men violently smashed the heavy iron padlocks, lifted the massive wooden crossbeams, and grabbed the giant iron ring handles. With a deafening, agonizing groan of ancient hinges, the massive eastern gates of Damascus were pushed wide open, revealing the pitch-black Syrian night outside. Waiting perfectly positioned in the darkness outside the gate was the entire Rashidun vanguard, fully armed, mounted, and ready for war. Khalid ibn Walid stepped into the open gateway. Raising his bloodied sword high into the freezing night air, the supreme commander shattered the silence of the siege with a roaring battle cry, "Allahu Akbar!" The cry was instantly echoed by thousands of Muslim cavalrymen waiting in the dark. The sound hit the city of Damascus like a physical shockwave. The trap had been sprung. The Muslim vanguard spurred their horses, violently charging through the open gates and pouring into the eastern streets of the city like an unstoppable tidal wave of steel and hooves. The impenetrable fortress had fallen. The eastern half of Damascus was consumed by absolute chaos, fire, and fury, as the Romans woke to find the desert warriors inside their homes. But as Khalid drove his vanguard deeper into the city, violently fighting street by street toward the center, he had absolutely no idea that on the complete opposite side of Damascus, an entirely different, incredibly strange historical event was taking place. An event that was about to create one of the most bizarre and complicated legal nightmares in military history. The eastern gate of Damascus was wide open. The absolute worst nightmare of the Roman Empire had become a reality. Khalid ibn al-Walid and his elite Rashidun cavalry poured into the ancient streets of the city. The element of surprise was total. The Roman garrison, exhausted from months of freezing blockade and still recovering from their festival, was caught completely off guard. For the Roman soldiers stationed in the eastern sector, there was no time to form shield walls. There was no time to sound the general alarm. Khalid's vanguard moved with terrifying speed, sweeping through the narrow alleys, putting any armed resistance to the straight Arabian sword. The eastern half of Damascus fell into a chaotic, bloody urban brawl. Deep inside the city centre, the sounds of city breach finally reached the command quarters of the Roman governor and his supreme military commander, Thomas. When the frantic messengers arrived, bloodied and breathless, shouting that Khalid ibn Walid and his forces were already inside the city walls, Thomas realized the situation was critical. He understood the ancient rules of war. A city taken by force, Anwatan, was subject to strict military terms. The garrison would be neutralized, the city's defenses secured, and his own position in jeopardy. Khalid ibn al-Walid was known for his decisiveness and unwavering discipline. When his army moved, it was precise and calculated, leaving little room for error. But Thomas was a brilliant, cunning survivor. In the midst of total panic, as Khalid's forces carved a path toward the city center, Thomas conceived one of the most desperate, brilliant diplomatic gambles in military history. He knew the Muslim army was divided into different corps, commanded by different generals stationed at different gates. While the terrifying Khalid commanded the east, the western gate, Bab al-Jabiya, was commanded by the legendary veteran Abu Ubaidah. And Thomas knew Abu Ubaidah's reputation perfectly. He was known throughout the Levant as a man of profound diplomacy, incredible leniency, and absolute, unbreakable honor. Thomas realized his only chance of survival was to surrender the city to Abu Ubaidah, before Abu Ubaidah found out that Khalid had already broken in. Thomas abandoned his eastern defenses entirely. Accompanied by the city's bishops and wealthy nobles, he sprinted through the dark streets toward the west gate. Arriving at Bab al-Jabiya, Thomas frantically called out over the massive stone walls to the Muslim camp below. He demanded to speak directly with Abu Ubaidah. When the venerable Muslim commander approached the gate, Thomas offered the ultimate prize, the immediate, peaceful surrender of Damascus. But Thomas offered desperate terms. He pleaded for a treaty of peace, Sulhan. He requested that no harm come to the citizens, that their property remain intact, that their places of worship be respected, and that he and his soldiers be allowed to leave the city safely. Abu Ubaidah looked up at the massive, seemingly impregnable walls. He had no idea that Khalid and his shock troops were currently fighting their way through the eastern districts. To Abu Ubaidah, this was a miraculous, bloodless victory. It would save the lives of thousands of his men who would have died in a brutal frontal assault. Without hesitation, Abu Ubaidah accepted the terms. He gave his solemn word, binding the entire Rashidun army to the treaty. The heavy iron gates of Bab al-Jabiya slowly creaked open. Abu Ubaidah and his corps marched into the western half of Damascus not as conquerors, but as peaceful guarantors. Their swords remained sheathed. What happened next is one of the most surreal and bizarre moments in medieval military history. Two massive Muslim armies were marching toward the exact center of Damascus from opposite directions, experiencing two completely different realities. From the east came Khalid. His armor was covered in blood. His men were roaring battle cries, their swords drawn, stepping over fallen Roman soldiers, taking the city by pure kinetic force. From the west came Abu Ubaidah. His men were marching in perfect, quiet discipline. Their swords were sheathed. Beside them walked Thomas and the Christian bishops, guiding them peacefully through the streets. In the dead center of Damascus, near the Grand Cathedral of St. John, the two armies violently collided. The shock was absolute. Khalid halted his blood-soaked cavalry. He stared in total disbelief. Standing right in front of him was his fellow commander, Abu Ubaidah, casually walking side by side with the enemy general Thomas, the very man who had killed thousands of Muslims with poisoned arrows just weeks prior. Abu Ubaidah looked equally stunned, staring at Khalid's drawn sword and the trail of dead Roman soldiers behind him. Khalid, furious and adrenaline-fueled, pointed his straight Arabian blade at Thomas. He shouted over the chaos, "What is this? We have taken this city by the sword. They are our prisoners." Thomas, terrified, hid behind Abu Ubaidah. Abu Ubaidah stepped forward, raising his hand to halt Khalid's charging cavalry. He spoke with a calm, unshakable authority that cut through the tension of the battlefield. The sources record his exact, legendary response to the sword of Allah. "O Khalid, sheath your sword. I have given them a guarantee of security. By Allah, the word of a Muslim must be honored." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the center of Damascus. The elite veterans of the mobile guard gripped their weapons tightly, looking to Khalid for the order to strike. The Roman nobles held their breath, waiting for the slaughter to begin. Khalid ibn al-Walid was a man of total war. To him, Thomas was an enemy who had inflicted massive casualties on his men and deserved no mercy. The eastern half of the city had been conquered by the blood and sweat of his soldiers. But the Rashidun Army was built on something far stronger than just military tactics. It was built on an ironclad foundation of discipline and divine law. Abu Ubaidah was a senior companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His word, once given, was an unbreakable contract before Allah. Khalid stared at Thomas, his jaw clenched. The tension was thick enough to cut with a dagger. Slowly, deliberately, Khalid ibn al-Walid lowered his arm. The heavy, metallic clank of his bloodied sword, sliding back into its scabbard, echoed across the silent stone courtyard. The sword of Allah had yielded to the word of peace. A frantic council of war was immediately held in the city center. The legal situation was a nightmare. Half the city had been taken by force and half by peace. Ultimately, Abu Ubaidah's treaty was extended to cover the entire city of Damascus. The bloodletting was immediately stopped. The citizens were guaranteed their safety, their property, and their places of worship in exchange for the payment of the jizya tax. As for Commander Thomas and the surviving Roman soldiers, Abu Ubaidah honored the agreement. He granted them a 3-day head start. They were allowed to pack whatever they could carry and flee north toward Antioch. For 3 days, the Muslim cavalry would not pursue them. Thomas, completely broken and humiliated, led a massive, tragic convoy of refugees out of the northern gates, abandoning the jewel of the East forever. The fall of Damascus was a seismic shockwave that paralyzed the Byzantine Empire. Emperor Heraclius, sitting in his capital at Antioch, received the horrifying news. The impenetrable fortress had fallen. His massive relief army was dead. His son-in-law was a fleeing refugee. But perhaps the most terrifying realization for the Romans was not the physical loss of the city, but the manner in which it was taken. The Romans had witnessed Khalid's unmatched, terrifying brilliance in deep infiltration and midnight raids. But they had also witnessed the unbreakable, terrifying discipline of Abu Ubaidah, a conquering army that could halt a blood-soaked victory in the very center of a breached city, simply because a promise of peace had been made, was an army unlike any the world had ever seen. The Rashidun Army was not a chaotic horde of desert raiders. They were a highly organized, highly disciplined military juggernaut. Damascus belonged to the Muslims. The gates to northern Syria were now blown wide open. But the Eastern Roman Empire was not dead yet. Emperor Heraclius was about to unleash a counter-offensive so massive, so apocalyptic, that it would force Khalid ibn Walid into the greatest and bloodiest battle of his entire life. The Siege of Damascus was over, but the true war for the Levant had just begun. If you enjoyed this massive conclusion to the Siege of Damascus, make sure you smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The tactical breakdowns on historic warlens are only getting bigger from here. Support the channel on Patreon to get early access to our upcoming episodes as we march toward the apocalyptic clash at the Yarmouk River. Until next time, keep your swords sharp and we will see you on the front lines.